Morning, everyone. Just going to wait a few seconds to allow everyone the time to connect, and then we will kick off today's report launch. All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the virtual report launch of the Global Wind Workforce Outlook from 2021 to 2025. This is the second joint report published by the Global Wind Organization and the Global Wind Energy Council in partnership with RCG that looks at how many workers that the wind power sector will need globally to fulfill market forecasts over the next 5 years. So this is a really unique analysis of the wind workforce and how we can keep them safe as well as they're installing the technology that we need to keep our planet safe. So we have a great lineup of program for you today. We'll kick it off with opening remarks from Stuart Mullen, who is the CEO of GWEC, Jakob Lauhaus, who is the CEO of the Global Wind Organization, as well as Michael Renner, who is a program officer focusing on especially jobs in the energy transition at IRENA. Julian Das, who is a senior associate at RCG, will then take you through the top takeaways from the Global Wind Workforce Outlook and the methodology that we use to in our analysis. And then we'll jump into a panel discussion with a great panel of experts from the report authors and as well as the training center. So at any point throughout the webinar, you're able to submit your questions for our panel using the Q&A panel on your Zoom toolbar. So if you have any questions throughout, you can submit them there for our panelists and we'll pick them up during the panel discussion. So with that being said, let's just jump right into it. And I will hand over the stage to Stuart Mullen, who is CEO at GWEC for some opening remarks. Over to you, Stuart.
Thanks, Alyssa. And thank you for joining us today, wherever you may be watching. The fact that you're here with us means that you are aware of just how significant this report is to the global wind industry. And as the world begins to recover from the pandemic, there's a huge opportunity for wind to capitalise on the momentum of a green-led recovery. And again, if we look at last year, it looks like a spectacular year for wind. There was over 90 gigawatts installed globally. But if we're to reach those figures that the IEA and IRENA are stating of up to 800 terawatts to be installed by 2050 in order to keep us under that 1.5 degrees, then there needs to be a significant step change. We need 300 gigawatts year on year to be produced up to 2050, or installed up to 2050. And with the increase in large scale wind projects set to happen around the globe, wind will deliver economic benefits, it will deliver benefits to the environment and the energy sector. These benefits are going to be the subject of many studies, and we here at GWEC are very interested in finding the pathways to turning this potential into reality. That's why we work with organisations like the GWO and the Renewables Consulting Group to look at the wider ramifications of this ramp up in wind. And as Alyssa mentioned at the start, last year we worked together with GWO and the Renewables Consultancy Group to team up for this Powering the Future, the Global Offshore Wind Force Outlook 2020 to 2024. And this year's report expands on that research and analysis to cover job creations on the onshore, adds onshore, and also expands the focus countries from 6 to 10. And included in some of the 10 countries are some of the largest wind markets in the world, like the US and China. They were the two countries that delivered the bulk of the 2020 installations. It also looks at high growth markets like Vietnam and India, and emerging economies like South Africa and even Mexico, which I think we all know is going to be interesting to see what happens there over the next few years. In particular, this report focuses on the highly skilled, highly valued jobs created in the construction and O&M segments of the industry, which reflects a small but vital portion of the positive economic benefits that wind delivers into communities around the globe. And this fraction of the total workforce needed alone, we're talking about nearly 500,000 jobs required over the next 5 years to install and to maintain the forecast wind projections. And under the current policies, GWIC, our market intelligence here at GWIC, is forecasting somewhere around 470 gigawatts of new onshore and offshore installations from 2021 to 2025. So GWO and GWIC jointly foresee the requirements to scale up training, the global training capacity, to ensure that countries can deliver on time and with high performance. Standards and proper training are essential to protecting health and safety as a core principle of industry growth, allowing wind energy to attract new talent and safeguard our reputation as the sector of choice. And health and safety isn't only a priority, or it shouldn't only be a priority, it's actually a prerequisite to be able to work in our industry. But it's essential that we act now as an industry to ensure that we're fit to meet the challenges of the industry and that we create the building blocks in which to base the foundation for the industry to come over the next decade. As a mainstream energy source, the wind industry now has an obligation to be a federating industry, to make sure that others are brought along with us as we expand and grow, that others are brought into the fray, and we do this in a safe manner, and that we do this in a proper manner, and we have a responsibility to deliver this. I guess as an industry, this is our responsibility to make sure that when we're talking about the just transition, those people that join our industry do so in the best possible manner. This report outlines some of the factors that we're going to need to consider, and the rest of the webinar today will take a close look at some of these issues. So that's it from the opening remarks from me. I hope you enjoy the rest of the session, and thank you very much once again for joining us here today.
Thank you so much, Stuart, for that. I will now hand it over to Jakob, who is CEO of the Global Wind Organization. Over to you, Jakob.
Thank you, Alyssa, and thank you, Stuart. Guten Tag, buenos dias, miao, good day. I hope we have a lot of people from around the world with us today. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are. So the report that we're launching today is built on findings generated by the GWO trained workforce forecasting model. And we commissioned this work with the support of GWEC and RCG. And the objective is to create a decision tool that may help investors and companies and policymakers and anyone really in the wind industry that are planning to erect and install turbines or operate turbines, and help you plan for the training activities that are necessary to help save lives. Because every day, hundreds of thousands of people work on our turbines, and they face unique hazards and risks to build and maintain the world's renewable energy infrastructure. And we have a duty to keep them safe so they can return home to their families at the end of the day. And as the forecast model in this report shows, almost 500,000 additional people will require GWO training or similar if we are to meet the world's forecast installation quota of onshore and offshore wind, while also keeping the workforce safe. So I just repeat that, almost 500,000 additional people. The world's leading wind energy employers, OEMs, owner-operators, and developers increasingly require GWO as a standard for safety and technical training up and down the supply chain. When it is available, they will use it. Not only will it make for a safer workforce, but because the standard is recognized by all up and down the value chain, as an industry, we avoid duplication and we create a more flexible and efficient use of the workforce. And what does that mean in numbers? So our estimate is that when you use a standardized safety training, you will save approximately 4 to 5 days per year in avoided duplicated training. That's a lot of value. So in other words, increasing the availability of GWO safety training, all of those countries where supply is currently lacking, is our single greatest opportunity to bring increased safety to more people. This report considers the need for GWO trained workforce in both established wind markets, where thousands of technicians are already working on turbines, like North America, like China, but also while using the same forecast model to guide the creation of a network from the ground up in new markets. The model calculates quite precisely how many people will require GWO safety training and technical training to deliver the forecast wind power installations globally, regionally, and at a country level. So it combines GWO's own historic training data with GWEC and RCG's forecast for megawatts installed, plus a wide variety of variables to generate a reliable result. And Julian Dass from RCG will provide more details on how we reach these conclusions in his presentation later. But for now, I hope that you can recognize the opportunity here. I hope the report will serve as a decision tool, as an input for all of you decision makers considering investments in the workforce and in safety. To the industry's existing community of training providers, I hope this will serve as an inspiration for your expansion into new markets and maybe as a benchmark. And for training providers who are new to GWO, well, give us a call. We are ready to support you to become part of the community and help us save lives. So thank you. With that, back to you, Alyssa.
Thanks so much, Jakob. I will now hand it over to Michael Renner from IRENA for his opening remarks and how this wind force outlook fits within the wider renewable energy jobs market. So over to you, Michael.
Thank you so much, Alyssa, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this webinar. Congratulations on on putting together and launching this report. I think it's a really super important report, no question. So as the deployment of wind energy and of course other forms of renewable energy expands, scales up, and the energy transition gets underway, it seems much of the conversation revolves around the issues of technology and cost. And these are, of course, very important dimensions, no question about that. But we need to, and I think this is really a great opportunity today, we need to really pay equal attention to the human side, right? To the skills, to the safety issues, to the various aspects that your report addresses. And so we really need to recognize that ultimately, wind or renewable energy is not only about technology, not about wind turbines alone, but also about the people behind them, the people who put them up, the people who build them and construct them and run them. So we need to really pay very close attention to these aspects. I think for the industry, this is super important in terms of securing the necessary skills and talents that the industry needs, that the companies need. And from the society at large perspective, and we all know that job creation is a very critical objective for policymakers, for the public at large. And I think to the extent that we can really see these numbers translate, I mean, these very large numbers, right? I think it will be a very exciting prospect to follow. So you already have up my first slide. So what this slide shows is at IRENA, we have over the years examined the job creation in the renewable energy landscape across all the different technologies in our annual review series. And as you can see here, we estimate that in 2019, this is the most recent year that we have this available at this point, at least 11.5 million people held jobs in renewable energy worldwide, both directly and indirectly. The number has grown quite substantially from about 7.3 million in 2012. And wind, of course, specifically is one of the largest contributors to this very encouraging picture. Wind has grown from about 750,000 jobs in 2012 to about 1.2 million now. So if you go to the second slide, please. So in addition to examining the situation as it presents today, we also really look forward to what does the energy transition really entail. So we have some energy transition scenarios that we then, this is a model that we do, and then we look at the socioeconomic impacts and benefits from these scenarios. So from today's jobs of 11.5 million jobs renewable energy wide, we expect the numbers to grow to almost 30 million in 2030 and about 42 million by 2050. The job growth in wind is expected to be about sixfold over the next 4 decades. And you can see that together with other energy transition technologies, the numbers really in the energy sector and the different composition moving away from fossil fuels toward renewable energy and other clean forms of energy is really very, very encouraging. But I think what's really critical, and I'm going to conclude my remarks with that, of course, policymaking matters a lot. Raising ambition is very critical. So in addition to the typical deployment policies that we have already in place and that we see really getting strengthened around the world, We need a set of additional policies as well. This includes industrial policies that can either create or strengthen supply chains that are really viable and really strong. We need a set of education and skills training strategies to ensure that the capable workforce that we need is indeed created, that skills demand and supply are reasonably well in balance with each other. And along the way, we need, of course, very active labor market measures just to really make sure that things balance out sufficiently well. And let me just, as the final point, say that it's really important that these different policy measures, these different policy areas really come together, that they reinforce each other in as much of a holistic manner as possible. So with that, this is the end of my remarks. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael, for those opening remarks. And that wraps up our opening remarks, which I think have really set the context for why a report such as the Global Wind Workforce Outlook is so important, especially as countries look to power a green recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, but also scale up their wind power markets to achieve their decarbonization and net zero goals, which will require many thousands and millions of people to install wind turbines to achieve net zero. So before we jump into the top takeaways presentation, we are going to play a short video for the official launch of which will go over the main findings of the report. So play the video now. Awesome. So that video went over the main findings from the report, and to take us deeper into those main findings and go over the model that got us there, I'm going to hand the floor now over to Julian from our CG. Over to you, Julian.
Thank you very much, Alyssa, and good morning, afternoon, or evening to everyone listening to this webinar. It's been a pleasure to support GWEC on GWO on this important industry topic. And I hope you enjoy the outputs as much as we enjoy pulling them together for all of you. So today I'm going to introduce some of the key takeaways from the Workforce Outlook, but also focus a little bit on the modelling approach taken. The model, of course, is a fairly sort of detailed calculation or process. So we won't be digging into the finer details of that, but just a high-level overview of how we've got to some of these significant numbers. But just an overall remark, I guess, is we wanted to create quite a unique model throughout this process. So a lot of the industry reports that you'll see out there focus on the workforce requirements across the whole industry for both onshore and offshore. But just to be clear that we're narrowing down and focusing on those training requirements for the construction, installation, operations and maintenance teams out there. So this is a fairly unique approach, we believe. So without further ado, I'll just kick off with the next slide and introduce a bit more of the report. So it's clear to see that our industry is moving quickly. So GWAC and RCG forecasts have around 90 gigawatts of installed offshore wind and over 360 gigawatts of installed onshore wind capacity to come online by 2025. To deliver this capacity safely, a common training standard is required, and almost 500,000 new training requirement is required by 2025. And you can see there that in the table, China and the USA make up the bulk of this new training requirement, but other countries across the world, stability in Europe and some of the emerging markets in the Americas and Asia Pacific also form that complete picture. So to deliver these projects safely, a common training standard is required. And we hope that the the lessons learned in Europe and the exemplary safety record within that region can be replicated across the globe by utilising those GWO standards. So we hope by reading this outlook, you'll be able to gain useful insights on the location, scale and timing of such new training demand, and find the outputs useful for your investment decisions and other sort of wider strategy there. So yeah, just to clarify that we're focusing in on those construction, installation, operations and maintenance jobs. So we're not looking at the wider workforce. So the numbers for that wider industry would be slightly larger, but hopefully you can see that the opportunity is still significant. So if I just move on to this next slide. So alongside the total global output or training requirement of almost 500,000, the report also moves to focus on this subset of top 10 target country forecasts. And as some of our colleagues have mentioned before, these are to fit a certain brief. So we wanted to include a range of regional diversity in here, but we also wanted to match the different profiles of the countries. So established largest markets such as China and the USA are obviously the largest markets, but then we've got high growth markets where capacity additions are being scaled up. And then we've got the early emerging markets such as Morocco and South Africa, where there is still significant opportunity. You will note that Europe does not appear on this map, and that's not to state that demand doesn't exist in this region. However, this report really focuses in, when you're looking at these 10 countries, on the areas of new demand where the industry can actually benefit from wider expansion of common training standards such as the GWO courses. So you will see diversity on this map, and whilst this is a positive, this will obviously come with its unique challenges, and I think we'll dig into some of these on the panel discussion a bit later. But the penetration and expansion of this common training standard will be challenging, but the opportunity is great there. So this is a call to arms, if you like, but GWO and GWAC can be there to support you. And just to reiterate, the report itself will contain further narrative on each of these countries and give an insight into the timing, location and scale of these opportunities. So just digging deeper into the model itself, this is a sort of high level approach, and as you can imagine, the calculation is fairly detailed. So we wanted to just distill that methodology down into 3 core principles, which we focused on throughout the delivery of this work. So the first of those is using trusted data sources. We used anonymized GWO WinDAR data, which contains details on when and where delegates have signed up to different GWO courses. And we've also used the comprehensive GWAC and RCG data on onshore and offshore installed capacity. And what we've done with those 2 data sources is benchmark them against each other to come up with a working relationship which reflects the number of the training requirement required to deliver a certain level of capacity across a range. We've combined this with strong forecasting. So we've utilised GWEC's global coverage and RCG's sort of presence from the start of the industry to build up a clear picture of leasing and policy updates to get a clear picture of where those capacity additions will be into the future. And what we've done is we've combined that initial working relationship with those forecasts to come up with an idea of where that demand might be. Now, a key principle again was the fact that we didn't want to produce a linear relationship. So the third pillar here is baking in some realistic assumptions. So this is where we sort of take that calculation and layer up the assumptions to make it slightly more detailed. So one of those examples is the movement of trained delegates. So we understand that particularly in offshore industry, less so in the onshore, that workforce is fluid. And it can move to accommodate demand in different regional locations. We've also considered such factors as GWO penetration rates. How successful can GWO and training providers be at spreading these requirements across the globe. We've also looked at such factors as abandonment rates, fractions of the workforce which might leave, retirement rates, etc., etc. So you will see in the outputs of this report that the training demand sometimes drops off and falls away and doesn't increase incrementally. And we hope that by following these three pillars, we've sort of provided a clear and transparent and truthful picture of where that demand might be, so we can stand behind those high 500,000 estimates that we've stated. So just to final up my remarks, so we've summarized three takeaways here. So the first is the scale of the opportunity. So as I mentioned previously, this is 500,000 new training requirement. This will have its challenges, but the opportunity is great for those training providers out there across the globe. And secondly, and importantly, is the significance of the GWO training. So to deliver these projects safely, you need a competent and capable workforce, and you need an internationally recognized system to do so. So we hope that the adoption or further adoption of the GWO course will ultimately lead to the safe delivery of future offshore and onshore wind. And the final one, further details are contained within the outlook. So this is just a short summary of what you'll read in the report. But this is out now, so please go out and read it for further insight and narrative on this topic. And thanks, Alyssa. That's my remarks.
Great, thanks so much for that, Julian. I know it's hard to distill a big report down to a 10-minute presentation, but I think we'll dive in deeper to some of these findings and themes now in our panel discussion. So I would ask everyone on the panel to now join me on the virtual Zoom stage for what will be an exciting panel discussion. So before we jump into it, there's a couple people here we haven't heard from yet. So I'm just going to ask them to quickly introduce themselves and then we'll jump into the discussion. So maybe first I'll hand it off to my co-moderator, Ralph from GWO. If you want to just quickly introduce yourself.
Thanks, Alyssa. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Hope you've enjoyed the webinar so far. I'll just be putting a few of the questions to one or two of our other panelists. My focus is on expanding and developing the GWO training network around the world. Thanks.
Thanks, Ralph. Joyce, want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Alyssa. Hello, everyone. My name is Joyce Lee. I work as Head of Policy and Projects at the Global Wind Energy Council. And it was a great pleasure to return to this second edition of the report and collaborate with GW and RCG again on workforce needs, particularly in a very big year for long-term growth scenarios for wind and getting us on the right track to meet our net zero by 2050 goals. So great to be here.
Thanks, Joyce. And Paolo, do you want to quickly introduce yourself as well?
Hi, I'm Paolo, representing the training providers, GWO training providers, mainly from South Africa, one of the markets focused on the report. and I've got some interesting figures to run through.
Looking forward to it, Paulo. Just a reminder that for everyone listening in, that you can submit your questions for our panel at any point, and we'll be picking up and giving them to our panelists here. So using the Q&A tool on your Zoom toolbar, you can submit your questions for our panelists. So maybe Joyce, let's start with you. So we've heard a lot about the findings of the report and what this means, but what is the importance of developing a workforce outlook, especially based on GWO training, these globalized training standards for the wind sector and the overall energy transition?
Great, thanks, Alyssa. It's a very broad question, and I think it gets to the fact that there's many different lenses to apply to the energy transition. We talk about financing needs, we talk about system resilience, we talk about emissions reduction tied to wind. But I think what makes this report very unique, and what it makes clear itself, is that wind power is going beyond just providing green electrons to the grid. This is about a people-centered transition, which is already engaging millions of people in jobs around the world. And as we show, the industry will continue to scale over the next 5 years, and will be engaging 500,000 more people globally at the very least. And this is a very important point, because it means that when we as a wind industry go around to different communities around the world and to different governments as well, and we talk about our shared energy future, we have to accept that it's one which will realistically disrupt existing livelihoods in the fossil fuel sector and related ancillary sectors. And as the disruptors, as the future energy pillar, the wind industry also needs to think about the opportunities and the benefits that come with this change. So I think on the one hand, this report is about showcasing that there are wide-scale socioeconomic benefits which do come with wind industry growth. On the other hand, the other important note is that this forecast is based on current policies only, which is a key phrase that should be attached to this 500,000 worker figure. We're projecting almost 500 gigawatts to be installed across both the onshore and offshore wind sectors around the world over the next 5 years. But we are still falling far short of the pace of growth which we collectively need to see in order to meet our 1.5 degree global warming scenarios by end of century, as well as our net zero by 2050 global goals, as outlined by institutions like the IEA and IRENA. Last month's IEA net zero report, for instance, showed that annual wind installation growth had to scale up to 390 gigawatts by the end of this decade in a single year. And that's going to be a big leap from the 90 or so gigawatts that we're currently installing on a year-by-year basis. If we can deliver the scale of policy reform and action and growth needed to meet those scenarios, that's just going to mean a greater scale of workforce needs by order of magnitude.
Thanks for that, Joyce. And maybe Michael, I'll bring you in here as well, since you work for IRENA, which obviously is focuses on technologies wider than just wind, but also on solar and other clean energy technologies. So what does this type of outlook mean for the water energy transition? As Joyce mentioned, this is only probably a fraction of what we're going to be needing to actually achieve net zero and pathways in line with our Paris Agreement.
Yeah, thanks, Alyssa. I mean, I would certainly echo what Joyce just said. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think we need to really just continue to have as much concrete evidence, as much concrete of a sense of how might this actually unfold, right, as we move forward. How ambitious are we going to be? How much will actually happen in terms of deployments? How quickly are we going to scale up and be able to scale up? And I think that really needs to translate not just into megawatts and gigawatts and so on, but it does need to translate into, so how many engineers do we need? How many technicians do we need? How many plumbers, electricians, construction workers, anything you can imagine, right? Because the demand for different skills and occupational profiles is really quite immense, I think, both in wind and in the other renewable energy industries. And I think the more that we can actually convince not just policymakers, of course, or people in the industry itself, but also really the public at large that, yes, this can really have a tremendous impact in terms of job creation, in terms of giving people perspectives and career paths, right? And that they are really going to be very varied career paths, right? We're not just looking for engineers or just one narrow set of specialization, but we really need a lot of different kinds of people. I mean, aside from, the manufacturing and the construction and installation, we need people who can plan, right? Who can do the permitting processes, who can do the finance, right? The environmental assessments and all that. So there excuse me, there's so many different occupational groups that are really playing an important role. And I think demonstrating that as concretely as possible with reports like this new one is really, really essential. And I think the other thing I would add is, you know, we have on one hand, of course, sort of the industry needs, right? On the other hand, we have a whole set of educational and training institutions which may to some extent be you know, aware of these needs, right, and be focused to some extent on these particular sets of needs, but many of them are much more broadly set up. So I think there's a real need to actually bring the industry and the educational sector together as much as possible, right? I mean, much of that is happening sort of organically to some extent, of course, right? But I think there's also really ultimately a need for governments, I guess, for one, to step in and to coordinate some of these needs, right? I mean, to make sure that we have not either a surplus of people who are eager to find a job or actually a shortage, right? Because we want to avoid either extreme to the extent possible. And so anticipating what may actually happen, right? And connecting the effort to actually train and skill people as much as possible with the likely pace of the scale up is really essential. So I think in that sense too, it's quite important that we have more and more information, more and more evidence of what will likely come to pass. So thanks.
Thanks, Michael. I'm going to take over with a couple of questions. First for Paolo, and then one or two for you, Jakob. Similar questions coming in terms of the type of scope that we're talking about for GWO training. But first, Paolo, you run a successful GWO training center in South Africa, and you know, in many ways, this report is designed for a business like yours, or one that's considering, you know, ramping up GWO training. What does the analysis mean to you? And maybe also, if you could put yourself in the shoes of another organization, what was your initial reaction?
Well, the report firstly just confirms the actual numbers that we are living at the moment this year. Being 2020, the COVID year that everyone experienced, it was still our best year ever. And we are sitting now exactly on the halfway of 2021. And we've already surpassed 2020's marks. So yeah, then the report just confirmed the numbers. So just taking into consideration the numbers about South Africa, that the report says 3,434 new people need to be brought into this industry. And if we now forget all the people that are currently in the industry and their refreshing training needs and all that, it would take us 13 years to train this workforce with the current training offer that is existing in the country. Obviously, there will be ramp up from the training providers, I'm guessing, as well for the workforce, but still we're looking, even if everyone doubles their training capacity at this moment, we're still looking at 4.33 years to train this workforce. So we're at the end of the forecast of the report. Take into consideration that rough estimates, there's about 582 people currently active renewing their training certificates by the numbers of uploads. So yes, it's scary on one side, very comforting as a business person on the other side. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, hopefully the intention wasn't to terrify you too much, Paolo, but I'm glad to see you can recognize that the opportunity and the demand is in place. Can I just turn to you then, Jakob? We've had a couple of questions which are asking about what sort of scope of the workforce we're looking at. We have a question that came in from a participant who's at the Institute for Research and Development, asking, you know, what exactly do these jobs entail? What do GWO standards really mean? What type of employees are we talking about here?
Okay. So in very simple terms, anyone who touches a wind turbine during installation, operation, and maintenance. So mechanics, electricians, people working on mechatronics, troubleshooters, all of those people who work on the turbines on a daily basis. And those are the people that are in scope for this training. So we're not talking about people who are in the manufacturing side of the house or in finance or anything. It's the people working on the turbine. And that's the short answer to that one. Can I follow up a little bit on what Michael Renner said? Because I think that's an important realization about this report. We're just talking about a subset of skills that are going to be needed in the wind industry going forward, installing all of these turbines or creating this new renewable energy source for the future. Only the people who are touching the turbine, working on the turbine, installing it, operating it, maintaining it, decommissioning it, are in scope for GWO training. And GWO training is just the safety part. Before the safety part, you need to have your basic education in place. We will expect people to be electricians or mechanics or somehow have a background in mechatronics. And those are the usual types of backgrounds that you have. And we can see that some of those we will get from newly educated people that are in the system already. We can see we can get some of those from the people who are transitioning in from other industries where activity levels are going down, like oil and gas, like mining, and so forth. In those sectors, some of those people will have the same types of skills that are needed, and GWO will be the enabler for them to transition over to wind. But there's still a big need for governments and schools, universities around the world to start thinking about how can we give those basic skills. And I guess that's maybe for the next generation of the report that we look at those skills as well. For now, we're just talking about safety training.
Okay, thanks, Jakob. We've had a few questions that have come in just asking for a little bit more detail on the inputs into the numbers. So I'll just turn to Julian for a moment. One of the earlier questions we had that came in from Alistair Stewart, he was interested to know if we're considering age as a variable. Alistair has a perspective from the oil and gas sector and their concerns about an aging workforce. You did touch upon briefly, Julian, the assumptions and so on. Perhaps you could just illustrate what you considered and then also clarify that this is a model that can be and will be adapted in future.
Absolutely, yeah. So the core input is the GWO WindR data. So we've got a fairly accurate view over the study period where we took the data from. So that's 2019 to 2020. So when some of the, particularly when you're looking at offshore, the sea survival course, for example, was fully established. What we've done with that data is had a look at the unique IDs of each of those delegates. And we've actually worked out, inclusive of refreshers, how many delegates actually have a valid certificate at any one given month. So what that does is it doesn't consider age specifically, but we are able to sort of track the validity of those certificates. And so such things as retirement through age and abandonment, etc., are inherently captured in that data source. And in terms of sort of more trustworthy data, when you're looking specifically at the forecasts, we're able to have a look, considering the properties of wind farms, particularly offshore, of when construction and operation phases, for example, are taking place. So what you actually have there is a marry of those two kind of granular level details, and you're able to sort of predict the amount of training demand per offshore or onshore wind capacity. So there are, just to summarize then, there are some inherent kind of assumptions within that WindR data, but anything that's not captured, we've tried to assume on top with these additional adjustment factors, if you like, such as abandonment.
Good, Julian, and a quick input on that from you, Jakob.
Thank you. Yeah. So the question about an aging workforce, sometimes that implies that you think about the workforce as young males in their 20s and 30s, and then they get kids and they stop working, or maybe they're in the 40s and they stop working in this industry. They're worn out because the body is really in play when you work on a wind turbine. But that's not really true anymore. I mean, a wind turbine has always been a big, a very heavy component, something that you cannot lift with your own body. and we are increasingly applying technologies to help minimize the wear and tear on the body. And so you don't have to be a very big, strong male in your 20s or 30s to work in wind. You can be a female, you can be old as me in the 50s and work in a wind turbine. We can have a variety of demographies in play here, and I think that's probably something that's overlooked when governments are thinking about who should be working in this industry. We could actually accommodate much more than just the strong, younger male person.
Thanks, Jakob. And maybe a good kind of follow-up question to that is, lots of workers in the oil and gas sector, are now looking to transition into more clean energy sectors, especially after last week's shakeup with some major oil and gas majors, and we're going to see a much more rapid acceleration towards clean energy from the oil and gas majors than we ever thought possible. So maybe Joyce, you can jump in here first and just kind of answer what are the reskilling opportunities from people coming from the oil and gas sector into the wind sector, and then maybe Paulo and Jakob, if you want to follow up on what this actually means on the ground in terms of health and safety training to get people where they need to be to safely work in the wind industry.
Great, thanks, Alyssa, and very timely question indeed after Black Wednesday last week. So I think this probably comes as no surprise to the folks on this call, but offshore wind offers a kind of premium there as a response to the type of labor market disruptions which come from the energy transition, having operations in a very similar environment to the offshore oil and gas industry, as well as the marine engineering industry. As well as relative to onshore wind, offshore wind also offers that kind of compound value for investment and job creation because of its longer project timelines and more complex requirements around manufacturing, installation, grid connection, as well as O&M. So some of the areas that might be similar and transferable in terms of capacities and skill sets from offshore oil and gas to offshore wind could include around subsea cabling, around the manufacturing of steel for foundations or substations, installation vessel operation, marine surveying, offshore lifting and crane operation, and there's quite a long list there, which means, as my colleagues can expound on more, a shorter retraining or reskilling pathway. And this is something that some businesses can leverage. Businesses in the wind industry can leverage by being proactive around recruitment. Businesses in oil and gas should certainly be leveraging by being proactive in business transformation. But also policymakers have that responsibility as well to make sure that they have the foresight for the strategic programs that can support wide-scale reskilling from a sector that is facing declining growth to a sector like offshore wind and wind writ large, which is a high growth area. So one example might be Scotland's Oil and Gas Transition Training Fund, which I think has seen about 4,000, 5,000 workers so far complete the program with around a 90% employment success rate off the back of their program completion. And we'd like to see more countries with offshore oil and gas industries take advantage of that kind of template for investment and training programs that exists. And that can really help to build up and create the workforce that will be needed.
Thank you, Joyce. Jakob, did you want to add on to this topic in particular?
Yeah, I think so. Perhaps just a short remark on that. When we created GWO training with the duty holders in the wind industry, so the manufacturers and the larger owners, the realization is that the safety training for working in a wind turbine is quite unique, and we created it in the absence of something that could take its place. So it's quite unique. So when you come from another industry, there's not a lot of transferable skills in the safety space that you can bring with you. The BST, the basic safety training, was about 5 days, is your entry ticket to the industry on the safety side of the house.
And it's important to clarify that point in connection to the typical oil and gas industry basic safety training standards, isn't it? That's to you, Jakob.
Yeah, well, that was my point.
So just to clarify the fundamental differences between BST in, for example, an APITO standard. We've had quite a few questions about what's the best way for someone to transition from oil and gas into wind.
I can venture an answer.
Yeah.
And it depends a lot on the labor market and the local conditions in the market. So in some markets, employers will expect that you have your training upfront and that you come with it. In that case, I would say, do the BST, basic safety training, 5 modules of safety training, including sea survival, which trains, your access and your egress from the wind turbine, from a vessel to a wind turbine, and make sure you don't get hurt in that step. And that would be the basic minimum requirement for working on an offshore wind farm. And so it's a fairly short course. It gives you 2 years validity, and then you will refresh again. In some markets, other markets, it will be on the employer to do it. And in those markets where the employer will supply that training, just go there, show them what you've done. If you're an electrician, you have a mechanical degree, something, we can use you. Definitely, those skills will always be transferable. I don't know if Paolo has a comment on this one.
Yeah, we've done a few transitions. Well, let's call it transitions. Yeah, in our facility, where people come from the oil and gas, namely from the Mozambican market, and now they want to transition to the wind energy market. And typically, yeah, they fly through the training. It's not any rocket science that we're adding. They adapt pretty well to the new conditions. They understand the difference, and when they leave here, they understand that there's a big difference between one market and what our market in the wind energy. But at the end of the day, I think it is it's a 5-day transition course. It's not that we are asking for a year transition or go back to being apprenticeship and restart the profession. So I think 5 days in a career change is nothing. Flying around the world takes more than 5 days. So as a turbine technician, I've flown more than 5 days to get to a wind farm to actually start working. So if you spend 5 days in training, I don't think it's that bad.
Indeed,
Thanks,
5 days is a drop in the bucket, Paolo, for sure. That's really helpful, I think, for the audience to hear, because I mean, we often hear about the kind of challenges of reskilling, but if we know it's, in terms of GWO and health and safety certification, 5 days is really not a huge commitment to get people from one industry to the next. And maybe just to back it up a bit here before we kind of wrap things up, is one of the major questions we've had and throughout this discussion is, there is a gap in training. So we are going to require a lot more GWO trained workers in order to install current forecasts and also to scale up forecasts to put us on a net zero path. So I guess this would also be for Jacob and Paolo, but how can people get involved with GWO training and set up GWO programs, especially in these kind of really high growth and emerging wind markets?
Well, if I can answer that, but maybe Paolo, you have been through the process at some point, so.
Yeah, well, you can walk the path alone. It's not a complicated path, especially if you've got the background from the industry already. If you're from outside the industry, like I saw 1 or 2 questions, training providers from other industries, and they want to cross over to this industry, I would suggest you partner up with an established training provider to walk the ground with you, get you all the training programs up to date, also get the experience, because at the end of the day, GWO is about, and I'm going to paraphrase or say something weird here, we try to teach experience. So basically, ideally is the instructor would be someone from the background teaching his own experience, personal experiences that he's had on the field somewhere along his life, and he becomes an instructor. And I think that's one of the strongest points of GWO, is actually wanting someone with experience in the field already to be an instructor and not just someone that does assess or facilitate the training or train the trainer and now starts instructing reading off a manual. So yeah, I would say most of the training providers would be open to that. Obviously, some are a bit more adverse to new markets than others. I can clearly say that we from South Africa, we are servicing Kenya and also Egypt recently. So yeah, everything is possible. Just have the mindset, approach a training provider, and I'm pretty sure they will glad assist and expand. And also by associating with another training provider, always have the additional resources where needed. So if you've got a high demand for example, basic technical training, where you need a more specialized instructor, you can always, the systems are the same. So if you partnered up with someone already, you can just migrate the instructor across the world to give the training. So yeah, that would be my suggestion if someone wants to start as a GWO training provider.
Yes, Jakob.
And just and then for the more formal parts of this, so on our website globalwindsafety.org, there's a whole host of tools that you can use and help you to start as a new training provider. What you need to be mindful of is that we set requirements for training providers as to how your management systems are, your instructor qualifications, and all of those things. So read that document, requirements for training providers. You need to find a certification body, a third party that can audit you and make sure that you are able to do those things. And then you need to also choose your topic matter. So in each of the standards, there is a list of learning objectives and scenarios that you need to adhere to and be able to deliver to the level of understanding and knowledge and skills and abilities that we have described in our taxonomy. So when you feel comfortable, you can do that. You invite your auditor over. They will go through your systems. They will witness a training, witness some of your instructors live, verify that you are actually able to do the things that we have asked you to do and that we set in the standards. And this auditor will come back to you every year, do surveillance audits and recertifications, so that we're sure that the quality of training and the quality of learning that a course participant gets is the same at Paolo's place as it is anywhere else, or at least the same quality as it is anywhere else, so we can trust the training. So there's some fairly straightforward, but also minimum requirements that you have to meet. And those are all available on our website. And if you have questions to those and haven't understood anything, write to us. No question. I mean, it's stupid. The only stupid question that exists is the one you don't put.
That's a really fair point, Jakob. And maybe kind of just one last question to the panel before we wrap up here. So, we have our lovely audience today hearing all this great stuff and hopefully reading the report as well. But how can we get the word out, especially in these emerging wind markets, to people in that country to the importance of global standardized training like GWO training, and B, what can we and how do we communicate to them the need to scale this up rapidly to go through that process that Jakob just described? Maybe Joyce or Michael, you have some comments on that. If not, I'm happy to hear from Paulo or Jakob as well.
Yeah, I think this is an all hands on deck effort. I think the conversation really covered the different communities which need to be actively advocating for more capacity from businesses on both sides of the coin, both in the renewable sector and in the conventional sector, as well as from governments. And depending on where our audience members sit, just being active about that demand, letting your stakeholders know, whether that's your senior leaders in business or whether that's your governments, know that these training programs are needed, is going to be a start. And there's so many different expressions of what progress towards greater capacity could look like, from a public-private partnership in an oil and gas dependent country to look at a broader retraining program, kind of looking at the basic skill set and basic education needs, which Jakob spoke about before, to within your very own company, looking at transition, working groups and committees, and trying to really get active about seeing what skill sets are going to be needed for business transformation in the future. apologies about the church bells. I'll go on mute now.
It seems like an appropriate way to finish up today's discussion, Alyssa. So we haven't got Alyssa's audio on at the moment.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, I was talking to myself, guys. So I think we're going to wrap it up here with the sound of the church bells. Thank you to all of our panelists today for joining us. It was a really interesting discussion. I think we're only scratching the surface of it. So if you want to learn more, you can scan the QR code on your screen now and download the full report. And feel free to contact GWO, GWEC, Irina, and SP Wind if you have any if you have any further questions about the findings or how you can get involved in GWO training in your country. So thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for everyone for joining us today. This webinar was also recorded and was available on GWEC's YouTube channel. We'll be sending out the link tomorrow so you have access to the full recording. Thanks again and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Cheers.